Vashti. Now, you told me this last week on the way home. That's why I called on you. Did I ask you too quick? She's someone in the story. Now, folks, that is an answer right there. That is an answer. You're right, buddy. She was the queen prior to Esther becoming queen. She was the one that wouldn't dance or bring herself before, I should say. Dancing would maybe, it doesn't say it in the text. There's no doubt that was going to be involved in it. But she was the one that was basically preceded Esther as queen. So those are primarily the major people in the story. So we have Mordecai's insight in chapter 4. Now, here's what's interesting, and this kind of blow your mind, I think. There's about 15 million, estimated, about 15 million Jews scattered throughout the Persian Empire. Remember when we were going through the beginning stuff, we said there was 127 provinces in Persia, okay? And so the Persian Empire was huge. It was powerful. It had to be very powerful in order to conquer Babylon, because Babylon was super powerful at one time. And so we have this huge group of people that are scattered throughout this foreign land. Some of them were born there. Some of them had lived there for many, many years, and they hadn't gone back to Jerusalem. And that's kind of where the story of Esther takes place. It is in Shushan the palace, in the winter dwelling place of the kings of Persia. All right, so we have Mordecai's insight in chapter 4. Let's begin by looking at his concern. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. So when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry and came before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Okay, so what was Mordecai's concern? Why is he all concerned about this? What happened in our previous chapter? Yeah, and who signed the decree? Who was okay, let's do it? The king. So this is powerful. This is absolutely authoritative, okay? So now we've got, just to be flat out straight with you, we've got government officials going to hurt God's people. We've got them set out to hurt God's people. The king has said, fine with me, go ahead and do it. So the people of God are in a bad situation here. Very, very, very bad situation. And you see how they're responding to that. And that's what I want us to note with his concern. What's some of the things he's doing here? What are some of the things you see in the first 3 verses? One thing, what's he doing? Yeah, he tore his clothes. One of the great outward signs of deep distress. He rents his clothes, he tears his clothes. What else? Crying out. Now, I want you to notice this. Is he... And, by the way, all the Jews seem to be following suit here. In all the provinces, it said, verse 3, wherever the commandment came, there was great mourning among the Jews. They were doing what else? They were fasting. Look at verse 3. They were weeping, they were wailing, and many lay in sackcloth in ashes. Now, what I want to point out there for us to consider is whenever there is a time to feast, the book of Ecclesiastes teaches that, right? There's a time to be happy. There's a time to be joyous. There's also a time to mourn. There's also a time to weep. And I'm not so sure that sometimes God's people really know when to do that. Sometimes we weep at times we ought to be rejoicing, and sometimes we rejoice at times we ought to be weeping. And sometimes when a state of something happens, it should bring us into great mourning. It should drive us to our knees. I know we're not going to be in sackcloth and ashes. This was definitely a custom of that time, really throughout much of the Bible times, and most likely even some in that area today. This is probably how they would still mourn. But they're mourning, and they're letting God know, listen, this is serious stuff. This is serious, God. We have a real problem here. I like also to just make one note. They were fasting. They were fasting. Now, I don't want to get into a deep discussion of this because it's not really pertinent to the book of Esther, but this part is pertinent. What was the fast all about? Why were they fasting? Yeah, absolutely. They went hand in hand, didn't they, Sharon? What about this fasting thing? Focused. There you go. It's focused. That's what I want us to see. How focused they were on bringing the petitions before God and how upset they were. Fasting sometimes is a natural thing, isn't it? Like if you're really upset, a lot of times you can't eat, right? I'm just sick to the stomach over this. I can't eat. And sometimes anxiety, when we're anxious about things, we can't eat. So sometimes fasting is a very natural thing. I don't think this was anything prescribed. Hey, let's do a fast. You know, I think it was almost a natural thing. We don't have time to eat. We need to go to God. We need to fix this problem, okay? His concern. Secondly, let's look at the calamity, verses 4 through 9. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hatak went forth to Mordecai into the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before her and the people. Verse 9, and Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai, Esther the words of Mordecai. Okay, so again, I want you to notice what they did originally. Mordecai is very concerned about this. But then it kind of moves to this calamity that Esther says, hey, why don't you just put on some clothes and get things straight? And he's like, listen, I can't do that. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. And so, interestingly, he sends a solution to the people that could fix it, or to the person here that could fix it. Queen Esther, he knows that. But he's letting God work. He's letting God work. And sometimes we need to take a good lesson here. Sometimes we need to let God work. We need to do our part. What was his part? Well, fasting and mourning and wailing and no doubt praying, being very mournful. But then he had to let God do his work. And we're going to see the work of God unfold. What's interesting is we don't always see the work of God unfolding, do we? Have you ever been in a situation, maybe not similar to this, but have you ever been in a situation where you didn't see the end in sight? Dark cloud? Jill?
One thing he also did not say was, I wish somebody would do something about this.
Great point. Great point. He went to the one who could do it. And he petitioned Esther. Now, what we're going to see is God uses people to accomplish his will. In this book, especially in this section, we're not going to see miracles. We're not going to see a miracle. We're going to see the providence of God. Now, I've had brethren through the years take exception with that. We want to call everything a miracle. God works today through providence. He doesn't work through miracles. As I said last week, to me, I think it's more awesome because all the events that he lines up in place to bring about great things. He still works. Still the same God is going to work for his people. That's what he's doing here. Concern, calamity. Let's look at the clarification. 10 through 14. And again Esther spake unto Hatak, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. And all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court who's not called, there's a law to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out of the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to Esther, or to answer Esther rather, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? My favorite verse in all the book of Esther, Esther 4:14. Who knows, Esther, you may have come to the kingdom for a time such as this. Notice he didn't say, I know you've come to the kingdom for a time like this. He said, perhaps. Perhaps. I want to relate something in the area of Providence. In the book of Philemon, now you're going to have to go back a ways in your memory because we did postcards. And I think it was during COVID we did the Bible postcards. I think I did them and recorded them, so you may or may not have seen those. But Bible postcards we did, and one of those Bible postcards was the Book of Philemon. In the Book of Philemon, there was a runaway slave who had come and just by chance, ran into the Apostle Paul. And Paul converted him and sent him back to the slave owner. But it's interesting in that story, in that narrative, in that true Bible account, Paul said, perhaps he came to me so that I could teach him the gospel, essentially, and send him back to you. And I'm paraphrasing some of that. Paul said perhaps. Paul didn't even know, as an inspired penman of God, he didn't know for sure that God had sent Onesimus, the runaway slave, to him. But he knew this, that God did work. And he said, perhaps this happened for God's good and for his good. So here's the thing we want to see here. The clarification is this. Esther said, you don't understand. I can't go into the king. I can't. Now I want you to think about the day and time in which they're living. If she's the queen. She's the queen. If she walks in uninvited, he kills her. Now, you know, you ladies don't bother your husbands when he's in the den, right? With his feet up on the, but I don't think he's going to kill you. He might snap at you, but he's not going to kill you. The king, if you come in uninvited, you're not probably going to leave alive. He'll kill you. It's just the end of it. This is the kind of people we're dealing with. This is the kind of dictatorship we're dealing with. This is the kind of government official we're dealing with. How in the world can God's kingdom ever flourish? How can God's people ever be saved? How can ever anything good come from a kingdom like that? And she was his favorite. Great point, Sharon. She was his favorite. And that's how he's going to treat her. I'm telling you, I'm like Henny Penny here. The sky is falling, okay? Let's run around in circles and lament the sky is falling. James?
Trying to think of a modern day kingdom or a nation that would relate to this, that would be this kind of cruelty. You know, you think about something like what we've seen in the news, the Taliban. I mean, this isn't like the King of England, it's a civilized society. I mean, this guy, you come to him and you weren't invited to get killed. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, but that's what she was dealing with. I mean, the thing I like here, Esther was very confused. I mean, throughout this chapter, she's very confused. What's going on? Yeah. Why is this happening? So she has no idea. But the great thing about Mordecai is he plants a seed of possibility and opportunity to her. He kind of says, hey, perhaps. And here's an opportunity. Maybe you can help. Even though she's confused and all this is going on, he kind of, does that. And she then reacts and the rest is history. So
absolutely.
But just plant that little seed of possibility and opportunity and encouragement.
And that's a great point. Here's something else we need to consider right here is we need to consider this. God puts people, remember this, God puts people in places where that person can do his will. Now, I didn't say miraculously. Don't get wound up on me. I'm saying providentially, God will line up things. How he does it, I don't know. I don't know how providence all works. I mean, I read it. I understand, the life of Joseph. Look how it worked out for him. Look at how it worked out in Esther, Philemon. I see the providence of God, and I believe it with all my heart. But I don't know how in the world it works. I don't know how he does it. It's God. It's unbelievable. It's amazing. But I want you to think of that for a minute. It could be the fact that you are in a place right now, or it might be next year, or it might be 5 years from now. You might run across a person that maybe, perhaps, you might be the only individual that would be able to reach them with the gospel. You might be the only individual, and that's scary. It can be a little bit scary. Why? Because I better be on my game all the time, and guess what? If you're human, you're not always on your game, right? But here's the beautiful thing about God. He uses us in our weaknesses, because the thing that about God is His power is better than our weaknesses. And I know this, that providence is usually 20/20. When we look back, we can see it. It's hindsight. We look back and we say, boy, look at that. Look how God lined that up. Man, I was in a valley right there. I was in a dark place. And God lined it up. I could share some stories in my life, and I'm guessing you'd probably share some in yours too, that you can see how this worked out. And I sometimes, when I look back at my life, I sometimes get a little anxious. Because what if I wouldn't have done that? Or what if that would have happened? Or what if that would have been different? Well, you know what? The power of God is amazing how it works in our lives. And again, it's nothing mystical. It's nothing you need to be afraid of. It's you need to be where you're at, and you need to be the best you can be when you're there. And God will open the doors. I believe that with all my heart because I've seen it. Now, it doesn't mean I won't get discouraged and forget that. That means I won't, be fighting Satan for a week and forget that God's working in our lives. But He is. He is. And I think here's a great part. If you underline in your Bible, that last part really, I think it should be underlined. Who knows? You might have just come to the kingdom at a time like this. You might just be placed where you're at. And I want you to think about that, where you're at right now. Young people, you got influence. You got influence. How are you going to use that influence for good? It might be that the person that you're having the most difficulty with today, God may use that for His honor and glory. But you've got to be the right person, right? You've got to be in the right situation, doing the right thing for God.
Just tell one thing about Mordecai. There is a time to hit somebody, so to speak, right between the eyes with the truth. And he does that here. Esther, don't you dare think that you're going to escape this. So that's a big challenge. She needed to be challenged and to kind of shake her up. But it was a good thing. And then I love his faith. God is going to figure out a way to work this out. Maybe, though, you could be a part of that. And so it's just, sometimes we expect too much out of one particular person. Mordecai could have said, you're the only one that can do this. Nobody else can. But he didn't panic like that.
Great point.
His eyes were focused on God. Maybe you're going to be the instrument, but if you're not, God will figure out another way. And so I just think that's such a wonderful, great example for us that we have to keep our eyes focused on God in the midst of whatever it is we're facing, not expect too much out of this person, that person, out of ourselves, because usually the person we expect the most out of and solve everything is us. That doesn't get us all that does is frustrate us.
Yep. And it goes back to what James just said a minute ago about Mordecai. He knew where the power was. Power wasn't in Esther here, by the way. And the power certainly wasn't in the king. Where was the power? The power was in God. Hey, God might work this out a different way, but Esther, you might be the one He's using. Just remember that. God will work things out. He'll bring it. All right, let's look at the last part of this. The command, 15 through 17. Then Esther bade them, return to Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan. Fast ye for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. I love Esther's faith here too. This is an example of faith in action. Okay? This might be the most challenging part of our faith. In action. It's easy to say, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's easy to mouth. It's harder to live that out in our lives. And if you're here tonight and you've ever struggled with anything in your faith, you know how hard it is to live it out. I'm telling you, from a standpoint of a gospel preacher, I know how hard that is. I tell my wife all the time, honey, I'm telling you what, I know the game book. I know the rule book to preach. I know what those people need. But you know what? Now it's time for me to apply it. We sometimes know the scriptures, but sometimes it's hard to apply them. Do you ever have that problem, or is it just me? Give me a nod, a shake. Tell me I'm not alone in that. Yeah, I want faith over fear, but man, when I'm confronted with fear, it's hard to have faith. It is. Let's face it. Some of the things you're going through tonight, it's hard to have faith. How's God going to see me through this? I don't see the bright spot you're talking about, right? I don't see any hope. If I perish, I perish. But you know what she said? I'm going to, essentially, by implication, she says, I'm going to do what God needs me to do. And if I perish, you know what? I perish. What a way to go, right? Now, it's hard when we think about it because we know the rest of the story. Yeah, but she didn't perish. But did Esther know that at this point? She didn't know it. Some of the most challenging times we're going to go through, whether they're health concerns or spiritual struggles or physical struggles or you know, I liken it to the old geese. You'll start seeing a lot of V's of geese flying. And if you've ever noticed that front goose, he takes the air. He takes the air. It takes all the air. Do you know what's neat about that goose? He can't take the air all the way where he's going. So they switch. They switch after a while. Has that ever been on one of those 10-10 projects, Doug? That ought to be, shouldn't it, right? And the other one's behind him. You know what they're doing? They're honking. Why? Because they know that there are times we're all weak. And I think that's a good lesson for us to understand. You know what the church is about? Let me tell you what the church is about. The church is about switching positions with the lead goose and honking and encouraging and loving and being patient and kind and getting to where our destination is, which is ultimately heaven. Esther needed it. Mordecai needed it. The Jews needed it. They're scared. They don't know how this is going to work out. All right? Let's go chapters 5 through 7. And what we're going to see is we're going to see Esther's intercession. Here she goes. If I perish, I perish. That's how the chapter essentially ends. And Mordecai went his way and did all according to Esther commanded him. Get ready. Let's pray. Let's fast. Get everybody together. I'm going to do this. We're going in full speed ahead. All right. Chapter 5, beginning. The heroism of Esther. All right. Heroism of Esther. So after letter C, Esther's intercession, chapters 5 through 7, your next blank should be heroism of Esther, chapter 5. I want you to notice some of the things she does. This is really important. I think this is important for us to understand. I want to share a quick story with you. You're in chapter 5. Let's get ready to get into chapter 5. A quick story. The gospel's God's power to save, right? Would you agree with that? That's what Paul said. Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation. All right, so the gospel's God's power, but there's a method to the gospel. And let me share with you what I mean by that. When I first became a Christian, I was about 10 years old, and I remember coming up out of the watery grave of baptism that night. I remember it was yesterday, and the preacher had preached on hell that night, scared me to death. I thought, I know where I'm heading. I was an ornery 10-year-old. I knew where I was heading, and I understood that I needed to do something about that, and I did do something about it that night. And so after I come up, I thought, you know what? The world's going to hell. I mean, literally, the world's going to hell. I need to do something about it. So never forget, next morning I woke up real early. It was in the summertime. Woke up real early, and my only example of evangelism was only people that wore ties. So I thought I had to have a tie on, so I put a tie on. It's a funny story, but it's true. True as I'm standing here. So I put a tie on, and I had a little four-wheeler at the time, and I thought the first place of evangelism is going to be my neighbors. They're going to be my neighbors, and they were denominational, and I knew they were going to hell. I needed to fix this problem. I needed to fix it Monday morning. So my hair was thick then, but it wasn't even dry from the baptism. That's what I say. It wasn't even dry yet. And I motored up to their house, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning. I don't remember, but I know it was in the morning. It was early. And I rapped on that door, and the two boys that I knew real well, they were older than me, but one of them came to the door, and he said, "What are you doing here so early?" I said, "Listen, I got to talk to you, man. I got to talk to you. It's serious." He said, What are you doing? I said, "Listen, I'm here to tell you, you people are going to hell." That's exactly what he did. He laughed. He laughed, and he shut the door in my face. Are you kidding me? Well, you're not going to shut the door in my face. And I rapped on it again, and his mother came to the door this time. And I said, listen, I hate to tell you this, but I have to. You're going to hell. And she said, would you please go home? We haven't even had our breakfast yet. and she shut the door in my face. And I walked away defeated. I couldn't understand it. I thought, you don't understand. You're going to hell, and that's all how you're going to react to me? Now, the point in that, and it's a true story, by the way. One of those boys, by the way, was baptized after that, but it had anything to do with me. It was a girl he met. So, in fact, I say he was baptized in spite of me. The other ones were never, and those adults went on to whatever reward it was that they were on to. But I learned something about that story. I learned that there's a method to everything. And in chapter 5, we're going to see a neat method that Esther does. Yes, she's willing to go in, but she doesn't run into the king and say, you've got to fix this. You're going to do it. She doesn't do that. She goes in the most respectful way she can. And I think sometimes when we forget there's a method to the way we deal with people, we're going to see it in chapter 5. Let's watch it. Heroism of Esther, chapter 5. Let's look at the banquet. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. She lays this out beautifully. Now, it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel. And see, she put on her tie. I knew there was something in there about that. And she stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Do you notice the respect, the reverence and the respect that she gives to the king? Well, he's a dictator. This is ridiculous. You don't understand what you're going to do. But she still dealt with it in the right way. I think that's sometimes a challenge for us, but she does it. It's a challenge for me. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? And it shall be given thee up to half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I've prepared for him. And the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now, I have to look at this in those first 5 verses, and I say, what? What are you doing with a banquet? Did you not just get the story? Do you not know what's going on here, Esther? But look at the method. Look at the laying logical, nice and kind way she's going to do it. Now, some people would say, oh, this is sneaky. This is sneaky. What it is, and we would call it people skills today. That's what we would call it. She knows how to deal with people. She has people skills. And that's something we can all learn. I love how she does it. She's going to make a banquet. James?
Well, you know what James 1:5 says, if any of you lack wisdom, pray to God, who gives to all men liberally. What has she been doing for 3 days? I think that's a key.
Boy.
I know this from my own personal experience in my own prayer life, that if I will stop, not to immediately react, if I will stop, tap the brakes, take enough time to pray over a situation, the longer I pray over that, the thoughts of how to handle it come much, and I'm not saying God's, miraculous, but I believe in prayer.
Absolutely.
And I believe that is God helping me through that to deal with it in a better way than I would have if I just reacted.
That's a great point, James. Amen. I want you to think about that for a minute, folks. I want you to think about that because we sort of miss that in our world today. Let me explain how we miss that. Number one, we're just pushed to the gills. We're all too busy. Every one of us are way too busy. The second way that's real danger, and I want to warn you this, and I'm warning you from, I know, okay, because we have keyboards that we can tap so quickly and hit send before we even think about it. Young people, you've got TikTok. Bear with me, I'm not cool. You got TikTok, you got Snapchat, you got Instagram, and what is Instagram? What's that? Well, I don't know what it's all about, but I know it's in an instant, right? You can upload something and hit it, and it can be there before you've even had time to think about it and pray about it. Email's the same way, and I know that's ancient, but email's the same way. And here's what I do sometimes. It's transparency, but I want to show you this. Sometimes I need to remember that just because it came through my phone or my computer doesn't mean I have to send it right back out. I think that's what James is talking about. Not the book of James, our James. Stop, think about it, pray about it, then proceed. God, how should I answer this? How should I answer this text? How should I answer this snap? How should I do that? How should I do it? I think if we slowed down a little bit and let God work in our lives, sometimes we'd be a lot better. That's exactly what Esther does here, by the way. She says, you know what? Let's have a banquet. She's thinking about this. Let's have a banquet. I'm going to bring you and Haman to the banquet. Now, we've got to quit. Here they come already. I want you to notice this. One quick thing, and then we'll end. What's a banquet do for people? Normally. Yeah. Non-threatening, isn't it? Non-threatening. You husbands know this. You fellas know this. If your wife says, honey, I made a pot of coffee. Why don't we sit down and talk? You know what's coming, don't you? Yeah, what she's doing, she's taking the sharp edges off of it, right? And I'm just teasing about wives. You know, I'm just picking. But what she's doing, she's taking the edges off. Let's have a banquet. Let's get together. Think about that in our dealings with each other, too. Sometimes we can de-escalate a situation just by doing something like Esther did. Any questions or comments? Esther chapter 5, we will continue in that book next Wednesday. God willing, I will be back, and I'll be looking forward to teaching. Now listen, don't miss on Sunday. Make sure you're here on Sunday. You've got a great sermon coming. I can't wait to watch it on YouTube. I might even stream it. You guys are an hour different than us, so I might get a sermon before I preach a sermon. I'm not sure how that'll work. But not only that, and then remember our leadership class Sunday night and our ladies class for the ladies. All right? Don't forget it. Be here. Stacy. Thank you. Thank you. See how short-sighted I am? I was not invited to the RB Winter picnic, and so I'm picking at Stacy. I've been hard on her the last week, so I got to quit that. Yes, please sign up for RB Winter, and you all got the one call yesterday regarding the Rupert. So make sure you, if you're able to be there for that. Love you guys. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you for your encouragement and your faithfulness to God.